Good afternoon, everyone. I'm George Mathew. I'm the managing director here at Insight Partners. Wanted to kick off this afternoon conversation really around how intelligent systems are continuing to evolve, particularly in the world of AI. And one of my close friends, Suhail from Jasper, is here with us to have this conversation. Suhail, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself before we go into the conversation on the dawn of intelligent systems?
Yeah, happy to. Hey guys, I'm Suhail Nimji. I'm our Chief Strategy Officer at Jasper. We are the first AI application company specifically focused around marketing. And so we had this sort of very inclination originally when we were starting out building this system and platform is that we wanted to be vertically focused versus horizontal. When we think about, which is apropos to our discussion today, when we think about the intelligent design, we kind of realized that the marketing stack was extremely federated and broken. And there was a sort of a net new way of reimagining something that had historically been sort of stagnated. And because of the advent of the LLMs, we were able to kind of take, from a first principles approach, a new view of how to kind of reconfigure the systems to build an AI native platform for marketing.
So, Suhail, one of the things I always wonder about is we made the investment in Jasper a few years back, and you were really one of the first solutions that came into market as a system of creation, a system of now we think about it as intelligence. How has the world evolved for Jasper as well as just anyone who's building these enterprise applications, particularly when you're taking, call it an AI first view of the world 2-3 years ago versus today?
Yeah, I think we were relatively lucky and early by design, and we actually took a contrarian view. I think if you really think about it, when we started the company, which was vertical versus horizontal, right? The world was thinking, hey, let's just go horizontal. Let's build everything for everyone and reimagine everything. And we kind of said, hey, look. We built a system that said OpenAI was not going to be the only game in town. And this was pre-Anthropic's rise and Cohere's rise. And now we have Llama and advent of so many different LLMs in the sphere. And so we kind of took this first principles approach and said, okay, like if history were going to repeat itself, like what are some of the learnings, right? And we kind of thought about what the cloud era looked like, which was AWS, GCP, Azure. There was this sort of advent of like containerization, right? You were able to take one application and drop it into another application. And so we actually went back all the way to like study the greats and said, okay, like if we were really going to think about what the future was going to look like, and when we kind of took that first principles approach, we kind of realized that being vertical was the right thing, that these systems, these LLMs were eventually, if you said to them at that point in time, you put an input in, you get an output out, that's what we call today thinking, right? For us at that point in time, it was, okay, the assumption is that these LLMs are going to continue to scale. It's not going to be one LLM takes all, because we realized very quickly that certain prompts or designs did certain tasks really well. And so we kind of took that approach and said, hey, what if now we call thinking and reasoning, we said, hey, these LLMs are going to just be a chain of thought for reasoning and build with that sort of first principles, like contrarian first principles. And so for Jasper, it's been really fortunate that the world has played out this way, right? Because we designed the system to effectively allow multiple integration points to say, hey, logic and reasoning is going to continue on one track of the axes, and analysis is going to be on the other track of the axes. And when you take that approach, what you end up getting is a world where you can take many inputs at one time and sort of rationalize and say, oh, this is the best action forward for a sort of prompt or a blog post now, right? You kind of take it out. So it's been really interesting from that perspective.
So one related point on that.
Yeah.
Have you now noticed that as you've basically built this creative, intelligent capability for the marketer and CMOs and their respective organizations, how has that really changed from like the initial view, which is like, hey, I'm going to just build a nice little experience on top of the foundation model to, it sounds like you're now at a point where there's multiple foundation models, multiple agent-based systems, like just help the audience really understand that like evolution that you've gone through. And then we can talk about in a bit how other organizations are going through similar evolutions.
Yeah, I think the way that we talk about it internally is called embrace and extend. right? Which is how do you take systems that were designed originally and extend them, right, in this LLM first world? We have a client today. It's a retailer. It's a Fortune 500, and one of the things we do for them is create 50,000 or 50 SKUs a week, right? So when you think about the ROI in creating 50 SKUs, it's a lot. And historically, you would effectively, if you think about what LLMs would do, is you would take a product description and drop it in, okay, and that was the SKU. Now what you can do is say, okay, I can go into a database, right, and say, hey, what SKUs actually need to be revamped and recreated. I can then say, hey, based on the last action or campaign or gap, right, as an analysis, create this one sort of SKU, which then allows us to go to a different level, which is saying, okay, once these SKUs are created, now let's take the action of deployment, right? So once these SKUs are in the real world, we can then start tracking how are these SKUs performing, right? So that performative action is new, right? So we take apart like where the evolution is. It went from just a basic primitive of enter out something, and now we can take that information, we can track it, and then we can actually run sort of a diagnostics and say, hey, it's a complete feedback loop, right? And so these, what we now, again, like systematically are calling thinking, it's just a design principle that allows us to kind of have this like regenerative like feedback loop that gives you the best next action. And so like for us, you can then take a static workflow, right? And I think this is where you were getting, is that you had these like one-dimensional workflows before that broke down. You can now actually enter complexities and say, hey, let's reimagine what the workflow should look like, right? To optimize not just productivity gains, but like ROI for this business. And then you can see like a ROAS go up and down, which again, like you weren't able to do before with LLMs, right? And that's why for us, when we started building an application company, it was based around that.
So when you think about what's happening next, we're starting to see these agentic workflows come about. We're seeing this shift from co-pilots a few years ago to the emergence of these autopilots.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how Jasper is now seeing that in the marketing domain, in the go-to-market domains in general. And are we at a point where we can build fully autonomous enterprises today, or are we still far away from there?
I think I'm going to take that first. I'm going to take the bait on that first question.
Sure. I gave you some bait to take. So you should be able to.
Yeah, I'll take that, and I'll say that we're still far away from fully autonomous enterprises. I just look. Humans are an extremely we will find something to do, and
we will always find something.
Correct, and we will always find the highest task for us to complete, right? And so I think like if you were to tell me that we were headed towards these like autonomous enterprises, what I would say is we're probably back into the first order of enterprise, which is probably get rid of all the redundant tasks.
Well, that's where I was headed too. Like what if like all the lower level redundant tasks could suddenly melt away?
Correct.
Right, and could they melt away enough that at least the first entry level jobs become almost autopilot-y?
I think so. What we're seeing now, right? Like when you think about Jasper, again, like we've had this unique advantage in enterprise, being the first company in this space, right? Like this is pre-ChatGPT by, call it several months, right? Sure. And in this sort of era, several months might as well be like several years. Spending time with customers and truly understanding like customer first, right? And what do they need? How do you want to build it, et cetera. And so when we were taking this sort of customer first approach, we realized again in a SaaS world, things were built and molded around more than like workflows that were probably broken, inherently broken by design, right? But you couldn't go back and fix a workflow from the 80s or 90s or even 2000s, 2010s, 20s, because there was no sort of system that allowed you to say, hey, hold up, can we really redefine everything and say, this doesn't work and we should probably rethink it? I think where we are today, relative to that sort of point in time, is that we actually get an opportunity to sit with a CMO or a VP of product marketing and say, hey, if you were to rethink this entire sphere, right? Forget your 1,400 applications that you actually need to go and do a point solution. You can actually then apply a new workflow to it. And so I would say we're probably several years out from a truly autonomous enterprise. But what you're starting to see right now is sort of the first wave of what it will look like. because you can sit with these customers and say, let's redefine the new age workflow, right? And that new age workflow really truly means, like, let's take this example that I just gave on the SKUs. It's another CPG client of ours who has shoes, right? And so we today announced marketing brand IQ. And when you think about the brand IQ, what that's really talking about is, can we take this image, right? So it's a shoe retailer globally in the world, probably one of the top 2. And what their job was is like, hey, we have to create a new campaign. The amount of checks and balances that they had to go through, right? And say, hey, the shoe cannot, in this geographic region, cannot represent this. And this sort of demographic can't represent X, right? Has to be on the brand and style guide. That's armies of people, by the way, doing something that is extremely laborious, right? They're not thinking at a higher level of magnitude, and they want to be, right? It's not like they're like sitting there and thinking, this is my ambition in life.
And suddenly they could now.
They can, right? And so for us, what we were able to do with this sort of team is say, okay, you have a couple of months for your catalog to go through a refresh. What if we do it in 24 hours? What do you do now?
I was even thinking examples like the product shot going.
That's exactly right.
Into another corner of the world, right? How many folks would you have to bring in from an agency standpoint from getting that shot correct in Brazil?
Correct.
Versus now the product is there and everything else can be generative.
And you can have an N number of these, right? So by the way, like, I'm trying to talk in client examples to ground the reality of the situation, which is you get to really, truly, again, like, go back to the primitives and say, what if? And that, to me, is like where we're headed, right? And so in this case of this retailer for these shoes, we were able to take their entire product catalog, effectively design the product descriptions for the shoe based on the audience, based on the segment, based on the location, and then deploy it, right? And then track how that performance was coming in and out, and then have an automated sort of sequence that said, hey, this is not performing well, put this task back in place. And so I think when we're going back into, and this is actually why we chose marketing, is because it's so critical to a business function that you get it right and you are iterative versus stagnant. And I think that's what these sort of intelligent systems allow us to do, is take a industry that has been relatively stagnant, right, and human capital constraint, and actually give it some level of technology to say, hey, we can actually go back and redesign what this new age looks like.
Well, this is one of the things I've been thinking quite a bit about, right? Because if we have that unlock in terms of reasoning,
correct,
the constraints around human capital could largely just melt away because we have enormous amounts of reasoning to do a lot of the lower level things that we were blocked in the enterprise of doing. And now marketers, salespeople, product people, engineers, like whomever those functional roles might be, can really go after the higher level work. Does that go to a moment where you could almost imagine work itself changing in a meaningful way? And so are you now seeing that?
Yeah.
Or is that still coming?
We're designing that. Like, that's the fun part, right? And our CEO, Timothy Young, says something that has like actually resonated with me, and it was kind of relatively profound. And he goes, we're in an era where we're prompting the system, and we're going into an era where the system will prompt us, right? And to your point of, are we in a sort of era where we get to think about this and kind of labor constraints go away? Yes, like we are truly headed into this sort of era of like services software, which is to say, hey, I can actually wake up, and Jasper kind of does this today, which is I log in and Jasper tells me my 5 main tasks to do, right? As a human being, I feel like I have a million things to do, but this system can go into my data, right? It can look into my, like, kind of create an ontology layer and say, hey, of your 50 different things that you have done, these are the 5 main critical tasks. And by the way, let us actually have an agentic workflow, right? Complete these, and now you can review it, right? You as a human get to act the X factor, which is this is right, this is wrong, and then deploy it.
So how does like multimodality then kind of factor into this, right? I mean, there's more than just the text generation itself today, right?
Of course.
Like now we're starting to see this ability to build a world model. We're starting to see ability to process images, video.
Correct.
Jasper's actually made a push into this area as well. So maybe talk a little bit more about how we go beyond just the LLM handling text-based reasoning and analysis.
Yeah, no. I think our sort of approach with the LLM, by the way, is just like we think of them as just like another service provider. Like it's just AWS or GCP. So like we get to really kind of say, okay, this technology,
it's more like just almost electricity, right?
Yeah,
just
it is what it is, right? It's air. And when we were thinking about like in the SaaS era, like, we were pretty deep in that, which is let's take an on-prem application to the cloud. We weren't like, okay, now we have the cloud, we should rethink this. It was just like it was a guarantee, right? And so for us, when we think about this LLM system by design, it's just more of this application of like we have all of this data that enterprises have not been able to take action on, right? We had this in the SaaS world. Data silos existed, right? And we all wanted to kind of create a data lake. You can't do that, right? They were never designed to talk to each other. With the sort of advent of this new technology and applications that are designed for the system, you can actually take that data and create insights. And that insights creates actions. And those actions create results. And so we can kind of take that approach.
So it's very clear to me that Jasper is fit for the future, right?
Yes.
Of how things are emerged and continuing to evolve in this space. But what about our compatriots that have built SaaS software for the last 20 years?
I worry.
Why?
Look, I think...
I mean, can't they just come in and do a bunch of stuff and put some AI pixie dust and see what happens?
I think we're seeing that, right? And it's not that easy. I worry because this is like that first point in time where, again, let's go back to the internet, right? Like you can't just be like, hey, like the internet is going to be a replication of everything that happened on-prem. Like it just doesn't exist.
It's like hundreds of clients
Correct.
over software companies died when the internet came about.
And
maybe
I think
it was probably Oracle and SAP that
correct.
Went through that loop.
Exactly. And so I'm no Oracle of Omaha, right? So like forgive me if I misspeak about this. But my take on this is companies need to be radically transparent about what they're good at and what they're not. And what they're not good at, and the thing with SaaS is what you saw, which was land, expand, and then like add 50 different offerings and like, lose the breadth of service and say, hey, like we're going to attack this. And I know we started off as like CX and now we're going to go into sales and marketing and go into legal, like.
And then do a platform.
And do a platform.
And do an enterprise sales.
Correct.
Over the top,
yeah, right. Like the whole Microsoft packaging and bundling system. Like I think right now companies are really having to take a really hard look at themselves and say, what are offerings that we just cannot do anymore, right? Even if it's a line of revenue for them, they have to say, no, we can't service this, right? Because if you do everything, you do nothing. And that's what this sort of LLM world is kind of taking into account.
Particularly an autopilot-based view.
100%.
Because you can probably build a copilot as an incumbent pretty easily. But like now this autopilot thing is like very disruptive of like the status quo.
And I think we're going to see a rude awakening for a lot of the legacy companies. And it's good for the market. It's really good for the market that we actually take, again, a first principles approach and say, what is a better way of doing something that we were just inherently stuck with? And that opens up an opportunity for you, right, as an investor to kind of say, hey, what's fun?
We like it right now.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
Moment.
Yeah, well, we like it too.
Last closing point.
Of course.
Just kind of hit on this topic. What would you say to someone who's now a founder and starting to think about that day zero, day one, as they're building a company? Is it too late? Should they get moving? What should they do? I mean, someone who's now been at it for a little bit and seen what a intelligent first world is looking like and almost sort of creating it as we speak. What would you give as advice to the founders that's on day zero on this call or this?
I would say the world does not need it doesn't need another ServiceNow. It does not need another Snowflake. It does not need another Salesforce. What it needs is systems that effectively make these incredibly rich data sets more intelligent, right? So I would say it's not too late. Think twice, cut once, and build around the edges, right? And again, in Jasper's world, and it's kind of played out well for us, right, is embrace and extend. Look at the stack as it exists today and say, hey, what can we do different? And what can we build around, right? If you try to take an incumbent head on, it just won't work. You're going to be like running into a brick wall. But if you look at it and say, hey, this incumbent does these, because by the way, like you have to respect the giants that came before you. Like you can't say, hey, you did it wrong, and therefore I have a way to do this. No one has a right to win. right? And so I think my recommendation is respect the people that came before you, respect the companies that came before you, because they did a lot of things right. Like they would have not gotten this way. But take an approach and be a little bit humble and say, okay, if I just do a little bit of this better or around and differently, right? Is that a big enough market? And what I also like is markets that seem seemingly small and become really big. So I would say for a founder thinking about the space, look for markets that, again, might not have the largest TAM available to you today, but eventually that's where the puck is going. And that's where you should probably be thinking about.
Suhail, thank you again for joining us virtually on stage. This is a wonderful conversation to have on where we see this sort of intelligent future of applications emerge. And certainly we're on the dawn of something pretty exciting.
Correct.
It's amazing to see what Jasper has been able to accomplish in these last few years and the many more miles that are headed on your road. And we're looking forward to continue to serve you in that capacity.
Thank you so much for being a partner and hosting me today.
Appreciate it again.
Thank you, guys.